Good evening, gentlemen. Happy to see everybody for another episode of The Blind Pig, courtesy of BGObsession.com. Before we kick things off, we'll do some quick intros. Top left is John. He hails as Boone. Bottom left is Paul. You can find him at Canadian Hog. Bottom middle is Mark. He's own. Bottom right's Bob. He is Neophyte. Top right is Chris. If you can't figure his name out, I don't know what to tell you. And my name's Derek. You can catch me at Silent Threat. So, I guess we want to do a pulse of the party here. And we're partially hoping that we get breaking news while we're doing this, but I figured before we get going, John wanted me to cede the floor to him, so I bow to thee, sir.
Yeah, so I've been holding information from you guys. I have a little confession to make. I actually, and I couldn't really say it until today, I actually have some fairly close personal ties to both Ben Johnson and Mike McDonald. And I can tell you that Ben Johnson did not go back to Detroit because we didn't meet his salary demands. And I can also tell you that Mike McDonald did not choose Seattle over us because we wouldn't give him a 6-year contract. It turns out that the name is just too fucking stupid. We can kind of keep this within our group, Anyway.
Oh, Derek had to leave. Wow, nice. I actually bought that for our.
I was going for a second. You
were so sincere,
so convincing.
Wow.
Jesus Christ, that was good, John.
All right, I just had to get that out of my system, so we're good.
So, John, how are you feeling about this whole thing?
Besides cynical.
No.
I know how Chris feels. He's got it written all over his shoulder.
Yeah.
I had a little video chat with Mark this afternoon where I was absolutely losing my shit. So yeah, I am with one of those overreacting. Craig Hoffman, I apologize to you, although you've only been alive for like half of the Snyder era, so you don't really understand for being a hysterical fan, but not hysterical, but I was pretty disappointed because Mike McDonald seemed to me to be like the guy, like that young, hungry guy who can get fiery when he needs to, but is also super smart. So anyway, I was very disappointed by that because I feel like, and we actually do have someone on the board. I'm not going to share what he told us but whose wife is very close to the McDonald's in Maryland. So that I think it was probably could have been a done deal if we'd wanted to make it a done deal. So I'm disappointed. Maybe he'll turn out not to be all that in a bag of chips, but he has that vibe to me. So I've had a hard time getting over that this evening, but I think I'm okay now.
So I think it's been interesting to watch the arc over the last 24 hours, right? Right up until Ben Johnson texted Josh on the airplane saying, yeah, never mind. Everyone assumed, and I mean, I bought into it too, right? There was so much smoke, there had to be fire there, that they were probably going to hire Johnson. And that may well be why they were flying to Detroit, right? They were going to have another interview. It might have been sort of like McDonald with Seattle today, that they were not going to leave without getting his name on paper. It's if we end up finding out that the reasons we didn't, if Johnson and McDonald, these two young hotshot coordinators, were in fact options A and B that we wanted to hire, and we didn't do it because of fucking up on our end, they were cheap with the money. They didn't promise to paint the office the color the guy wanted, whatever. If we didn't negotiate in good faith and we find out that we underbid for one of these guys, yeah, I'm gonna be very disappointed, particularly if one of them turns out to be, or both turns out to be, the head coach that we were all hoping they'd be here. What's happened since then in the last 24 hours is I'm watching everybody in the press and online and certain good friends of mine who were having a bad day for a little while it's like we've defaulted to that it's the same old Washington football team, right? We couldn't close a deal and we're going to end up getting screwed. I'm I tried to write about this briefly on the board, and I'm still trying to walk that fine line between accepting that our new leadership, Harris and Peters, up until 24 hours ago, were the golden children and had given us no reason to believe they didn't know what the hell they were doing. The last 24 hours have ripped open a little bit of the fabric of the universe, and we're peeking inside and seeing all this horrible darkness. I'm resisting that, and I'm kind of wondering if am I just being Pollyanna here and not admitting that we screwed it up? Or should we wait and see how this thing plays out? And those are both defensible arguments, by the way. I could argue either way on this one.
So, confession. I was never really on the Ben Johnson bandwagon. If you look at my posts on the board, I didn't know who I wanted to be head coach. I still don't know who I want to be head coach. I've got a couple ideas about who I don't want to be head coach. That's easier to nail down, I think, for me, right? Who I don't want to be head coach. And I've seen a number of guys hired in the NFL in the last 2 weeks that I'm thrilled weren't hired by us. I can't say McDonald is one of those guys. I kind of feel like maybe I wanted McDonald, and I was just sitting here watching Twitter, and the Seattle Seahawks Twitter feed has pictures of him walking into the facility in his suit with his wife, and the whole staff has turned out to welcome him. And I thought, man, that could have been us. That's kind of cool, because he's the young hotshot, defensive coordinator guy. The whole Ben Johnson thing didn't really bother me much. In fact, I was, Boone, you stated it outright, that we'd rather the guy decide before he got here and signed the paperwork that this wasn't the job for him, or that he wasn't ready to take this step. And here's the thing: if he's not ready to take this step, he's probably not going to do a great job. Interesting fact: men are perfectly willing to put in for a job that they're 60% qualified for. I say men because women, not so much. Women need to feel closer to 90% qualified for a job before they put in for it. But if this guy doesn't feel like he's ready to take that step for whatever reason, that tells me that he doesn't even think he's 60% qualified for the job. I don't want that guy. Maybe he'll get it figured out, but I don't want that guy at the moment. I want a guy that feels like he's ready for this. And so I don't know, maybe I'm the weird one. I've watched the world melt down for, I don't know, almost 36 hours now, and I'm not part of it. I don't feel like Adam Peters is shit in the bed. I don't feel like, Adam or that Josh Harris is too involved. I'm not worried. I'm not really worried about it. And somebody else said it on the board today. This is not an original thought on my part. It was floating around in the back of my head unrecognized until somebody posted it on the board today. And I think it was Bergold. If it wasn't, somebody correct me. But I feel like Adam Peters has this under control. And I feel like there's a name nobody's talking about that maybe was number one on Adam Peters' list from the beginning. And that's where we're going. And if that's the story, then I'm good with it.
It's good stuff, Bob.
I had put on that now there has to be a mystery candidate. There just has to be.
Maybe it was you, Chris. Maybe it was you that said that. And if it was, I apologize for crediting somebody else.
No. And when I thought about that, I immediately went to Steve Wilkes with the 49ers connection to Peters. I wasn't heartbroken that Ben Johnson made the decision Ben Johnson made for whatever reason he made it. It's his decision. But when we didn't get McDonald, I felt very much like I could imagine a bride in her beautiful wedding gown standing at the altar getting stood up felt. And then immediately started getting inundated with information about Dan Quinn. And I got to tell you, I wasn't happy about that. I think perhaps it's possible that the Harris Group and Peters had their hopes on Johnson or McDonald. But I also don't think it's unreasonable to say that for a general manager position, I think this was a very interesting place for those candidates. As a head coach, I'm not sure it's that appealing. Tremendous needs on the roster. Yes, there's cap space, not as much as we all think it is because we don't have many people on the roster. Yes, good draft capital. But other than that, in a business where you got to win now or you got to win in the short term, if I'm Mike McDonald and I have a choice between Washington and Seattle, I'm 99% sure I'd go to Seattle. They have a rabid fan base that doesn't need to be pulled out of mothballs. They've got a good stadium. They've got a good front office. Not sure about the ownership and what's going to happen there. They've got a more talented roster. They're in a better position to win now. I think perhaps the Harris Group and Peters, potentially, my favorite word of the day, overestimated how appealing this job was as a head coach.
I heard somebody say today that that a rebuilding team is not nearly as attractive to a first-time head coach candidate. And the reason they said is that there's a history where if you have a bad result as a first-time head coach, it can take you years and years to like rebuild your rep and get another chance at it.
Like Raheem.
Yeah, yep, like Raheem Morris, exactly. Paul, what do you got, man? How are you feeling, or how'd you feel today?
I am, to be honest with you, I am not very worried whatsoever at this point. I know our first inclination is to overreact because we're not landing some of the names that have been hyped up. But I don't think it's reason to worry right now. The thing that I keep trying to remind myself of is the following: young hotshot coordinator fails as often as it works out. And when you think of the Washington environment, there are a lot of weeds to sift your way through. It's not a job for anybody. And when they talk about the whole idea of leadership, I think it's going to take a special kind of person to come in here and make it work. I guess what I'm trying to say is the job in Washington, I personally feel, based on our past and based on all the challenges and all the obstacles that have existed in the past, it's going to take a very, very special type of person to get it right here. So basically, it's not a job for everyone. I also keep trying to remind myself that the crown jewel of our offseason was getting a real general manager. We got a general manager who has a proven track record. We have a general manager who has been in winning environments. And quite honestly, this is part of his job description. Some of the options that you thought were going to be available are now not available. That's his job to fix that. That's his job to figure it out. And it's his job to be able to find a candidate, to be able to find someone that is going to make it work here. The path to least resistance, Ben Johnson or Mike McDonald, they're not available. You have to have those other alternatives, and you have to have those other options that you can lean into. And I'm fully confident that they will be able to find someone that will be able to get this operation kickstarted. So I'm not going to worry because, again, we have a general manager who I think is really, really solid. And this is part of his job description. Get it right when option A and B are not available.
My only argument to that would be we heard we want leadership, leadership, leadership. Okay. Dan Quinn has been defined as exuding leadership. Aaron Glenn has been described as being the second alpha in the room in Detroit behind the head coach. Why haven't they hired those leaders? I mean, that was something that I struggled with today. You know, Johnson's gone, McDonald's gone. Now it's been the entire day, no news, nothing. Maybe it's getting done. Maybe they're doing that. Maybe there's a mystery person. But I don't have as much faith. I think right now that they are looking for their paddles and they're they're rowing as fast as they can without one, trying to figure out what to do. I think they got caught by surprise by these last two.
It kind of feels in a way like we're shopping on a used car lot right now because we
Yeah.
don't have enough money to buy a brand new car.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we can't find something that's going to work and something that's going to get us from point A to point B.
Right.
I honestly don't think it's reason to panic.
So to stick with that analogy, Paul, I don't buy anything but used cars and haven't for years. I feel like there's better value on the used car lot than there is on the new car lot. That's just me. Which is not to say that I want a guy that's been there and done that before. Although I will tell you, there is a name out there, and somebody already, Chris already mentioned it. Steve Wilkes kind of intrigues me a little bit. He did amazing things at Carolina when he was made interim coach last year. And then
I don't know about amazing. He did a good job. He won half of their last 12 games.
when you consider where they were when he took over,
I mean, he did a
John, I mean, they were in a place that got a coach
I know.
fired.
I know. I'm just saying, I mean,
you know, now, which is not, but Adam Peters has been in the same building with Steve Wilkes now for the last 10 or 11 months. So he certainly has a feel for the guy, maybe not as much as he does, say, a Bobby Slowick. But
I wanted to throw one other thing out there before
Go
we
ahead.
start. Let's transition, and I know Derek hadn't had a chance to get a word in edgewise. So Derek, you get the floor after I say this. Because I think we need to transition to like wrap up the conversation about how we felt today, and then really talk about who's still out there, including the guys that we've already interviewed. But we currently are in the window for being able to interview the coaches on the Super Bowl roster. So as of the 29th, we were allowed to start interviewing any coaches on San Francisco or KC's roster, and we have that window through the 4th. If we don't interview them before the 4th, then we have to wait until after the Super Bowl. So I just wanted to bring that up because we should know, and I believe that they're required to announce that they're interviewing. I don't think they can do it surreptitiously, but that's just what I've read. So we should know if there's like mystery candidates, or maybe there weren't mystery candidates, but now there are mystery candidates. We should know that in the next few days, I would think. Although it is curious that God and everyone else is at the Senior Bowl, apparently, which I think that's the other weird aspect of this is just seems kind of weird to me that you don't have a head coach yet, but you've got half your front office or more down looking at players right now, which seems like that's a lesser priority. But anyway, I just want to throw that out there.
Well, so I'm not that concerned about the candidates, to be honest with you, because at the end of the day, I have not invested my brain into wins and losses in 2024. I've actually tried to completely disconnect my brain from wins and losses in 2024. The reality in the NFL is we're going into and I posted this on the board kind of along these lines. We're going into a season where the owner's first season is as the first full season as the managing partner and decision maker of a franchise. We're going into the first full season of a general manager. So I can see why coaches might not find this as the most lucrative and, beneficial to them in the short term scenario. As Chris pointed out, if you just count the players that are becoming free agents, we're turning over 35% of the roster. And that doesn't even include the places that we're looking to upgrade. That's literally just the players that are becoming unrestricted free agents. So, with that, obviously, there's a lot of work to do. The coach is not going to have a lot of control about his players because there's going to be such a massive amount of signing just to fill out the 53. I'm not trying to say this to make it like it's a bad situation, but as to Chris's point, this is a much more intriguing and probably a much more exciting situation to a general manager than it is a head coach. I don't think Ben Johnson screwed us over the way people are acting. I think, yeah, he strung us along a little bit. You would have wished that he would have come out before, after or in the virtual interview or shortly after and said, hey, you know what? This isn't right for me. But it's not like he chose Seattle over us. So I don't really feel like the scorned lover in this scenario there. McDonald, I think we might have missed the boat a little bit because he wasn't our initial investment. And by the time they scrambled and were able to try to reach out, he was already on his way to Seattle. His mind was made up. Did they take too long? Sure, we can have that conversation. But other than that, name a coach that I think we unanimously believed that we wanted and we missed out on. We have people here that wanted Harbaugh, but I don't think he was ever coming here. Outside of him, was anybody, chomping at the bit for Raheem Morris? Was anybody chomping at the bit for I can't remember his name ever, but the guy that Carolina ended up grabbing, the offensive coordinator from Tampa?
Vrabel probably got the biggest play, but we didn't interview him either.
Right. So I think it's less about me being upset because of the way that things transpired and more about my curiosity. I'm going to go the other direction where John, you mentioned that everybody and their mothers at the Senior Bowl right now. I'm going to go the other direction and say that I'm a little concerned we don't have a head coach because we need to have people at the Senior Bowl and we don't know what the hell we're scouting for yet. That's my concern. And it's less about who the coach is going to be and more about the direction of the team. Adam Peters is going to have to scout every single player in the Senior Bowl because depending on what kind of head coach we get is going to change the scheme. I would have liked to have a head coach and a scheme, at least a direction in place before you go down there so you can start looking at specific things.
Well, and we're way behind the curve on coordinators, right?
Yeah.
And I know I heard people make this argument, like I think Craig Hoffman made this argument today that, well, these guys know they've already got, the OC and the DC in their mind. They may have probably even talked to those guys. It's like, yeah, but good OC and DC candidates aren't going to sit at home because,
this
Dan
guy,
or somebody said, hey, I may
get a job.
Maybe the head coach.
Right.
They get an offer, they're probably going to take it. So
Right.
I do think that's a concern with how long this is taking.
As it evolves further, I'm starting to wonder if there's somebody on the San Francisco staff that Peters has circled, and that's been the delay this whole time. Because
So
it just makes
basically
too much.
Steve Wilkes or Anthony Lynn. Right?
I would say it would probably be Wilkes if it's anybody.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, and to take it a step further, I have almost zero confidence that the first coach that this team hires is going to be the one that is the long-term coach here. I mean, this is a short-term, Harrison Company just buying this, Adam Peters, a new GM, roster turnover. There's not 4 to 5 years of patience in the NFL. So chances are this coach coming in here is not coming in here, which is why they probably didn't want to give McDonald 6 years. And they probably know that this is not going to be the guy that we need a revolution. We need a turnover of time here before we can actually start putting a stamp on the roster and the franchise and the direction of it. So I'm not any more upset now than I'm not upset. I want to get it done because I'm ready to move on to the season. So does McDonald going to Seattle hurt me a little bit? Yeah, I would have loved to have him here because I think highly of him, but I don't think it changes my mind any.
So we've got 3 coaches that we've actually interviewed. We've got Dan Quinn, we've got Aaron Glenn, and we've got Anthony Weaver. We don't need to talk about all 3 of those guys.
Weaver has my attention.
I think Weaver's the guy that probably out of those three. I know Dan Quinn has gotten a lot of media hype,
Mhm.
but lately, what I'm hearing is that how impressed they were with Weaver. Now, whether somebody's making that up or they actually heard it from somebody, we can debate. But Weaver, who's already the assistant head coach, he's the only position coach that we've interviewed. He seems like of those three, he seems like he's probably at the top of the list right now. What do you guys think?
If I can kick it off, I'll say Weaver's got my most intrigue now because I want young, hungry, and I don't want, you know what I mean? I want the guy that's going to come in here and he's going to be fighting for his future. Save what I just mentioned about it being a short-term gig, be the guy that can prove me wrong and be the guy that can, solidify his spot with and be married with Adam Peters and build this thing for the long term.
In regards to Dan Quinn in particular, I think he has a lot of positives. I think he has a lot going for him. I know he's not a guy that a lot of people are crazy about. The one comment that I want to make about him and the one thing that concerns me about him is we've talked so often about how important it is to get our offense rolling, how important it is to, be able to have someone at that offensive coordinator spot that is going to be able to, get this unit moving in the right direction. When you look at Dan Quinn, when Kyle Shanahan left the Falcons, the thing that concerns me most about him is he was never able to recover. I think he hired Steve Sarkisian and then Dirk Cutter. He was never ever able
over Matt LaFleur, by the way. Matt LaFleur was sitting there ready to slide right into that role.
That's right.
They bypassed him, which that's a pretty big miss.
Yeah. So I mean, when you think of that Atlanta offense, they were rolling with Shanahan, and I mean, the guy was never able to recover. He was never able to identify the right person to get a pretty talented unit to continue on their trajectory of success, and it ultimately cost him his job there. So, I mean, would the same type of thing happen here? That concerns me.
So one of the things that I'll be posting, have any of you listened to Logan Paulson talk about Quinn?
Oh yeah, like for a month.
One of the things specifically that he talked about was that Quinn, shortly after he lost a job in Atlanta, called everybody that he worked with, including Logan, and asked him for his feedback and opinion on what he thought went right and what he thought went wrong. And one of the things Logan shares is that Quinn said probably his biggest mistake, I think, or among his biggest mistakes, was when after Kyle left, that he became more active. He sort of stepped in on the offensive side of the ball and did not recognize the need for that dynamic offensive coordinator, and that was one of the lessons learned from his gig in Atlanta. If I'm going to defend Dan Quinn, I mean, there are several areas that I would defend, frankly. One of them is that the guy he's been in the NFL, 20 plus years at every level, successful enough to have a team one quarter away from beating the legendary Tom Brady and Bill Belichick in the Super Bowl before that ridiculous meltdown. But he succeeded on that level by any objective measure. He's got 20 years of experience. He's got a 20-year-old Rolodex. He knows everybody. He is plugged in. If you want a guy who can step in on day one and have a clue and not, it's not too big for him. He's been doing this 20 years.
Well,
You don't necessarily know that with a young guy.
And of all the people that are out there, he could probably fill a staff as quickly as anybody.
That's what I'm saying. He's probably got 10 guys on speed dial who he would bring in on his staff. When they sit down and talk to him this last time, that conversation came up. Who would you be bringing in if you came, Dan? And fucking hey, here's my list, and here's the kind of thing I would run and all that. So all I'm saying is the experience thing and leadership. I mean, Dan wasn't my first choice. I was talking about Mike Vrabel a month ago, and that for whatever reason never launched. I'd like to talk about that some tonight, but of all the guys right now, the one that seems like sort of the surest bet to be a solid guy to get this thing started under new ownership and all that, it might be Quinn. I think certainly more than than Steve Wilkes for me. Name.
If I could, I'd like to throw a tiny wrench into the conversation quickly. The three top names that are remaining, at least that have been interviewed and are still available, are all defensive sided guys. There is one candidate that has an offensive background that by all reports had an a wonderful interview with the Commanders. And that was Eric Bieniemy. If we hire one of these defensive guys, would you be in favor of Eric Bieniemy being the offensive coordinator going forward?
Wouldn't be my first choice, but I would certainly listen, and I would expect that new head coach to sit down with Eric Bieniemy and make an informed decision on that. I think if nothing else, I think I've said this before, he earned interviews. Eric Bieniemy has earned the right to get an interview for that job.
And I think he interviews well. I mean, he press conferences well.
Not well enough to get a head coaching job.
No, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if he's good in an interview.
I would not be happy with that, and not because I like Eric Bieniemy a lot as far as at least who he puts himself forward as. I mean, we are gonna be putting our eggs in a new either Sam Howell or more likely a quarterback that we draft with that second pick, and I was not impressed with how he handled Howell. I think he might well have ended any chance that Sam Howell has as a career as a starting quarterback, but by the way he handled him, and with the most passing attempts in the entire NFL, while he got basically bull rushed.
That's not what you were going to say, but I'm going to let it slide.
So I don't know that. I mean, I have a lot of concern about.
Did you intend something that rhymed with bang tape? Is that what you were going for?
No comment.
Anyway,
I think
that's my only concern. And
Sam Howell has grounds for a lawsuit against Eric Bieniemy, as far as I'm concerned. And no, I'll honestly, I wouldn't be upset if Bieniemy were still associated with the club. I think I'd actually be happier if he were the head coach and not the offensive coordinator. I think Bieniemy has the stuff to be, notice the capital T there, but I think Bieniemy has the stuff to be a pretty solid head coach. My biggest problem with Bieniemy was that when Sam started to struggle this season, Eric sat down in front of the press and effectively said, I don't know how to help the young man. I mean, that comes straight out of a press conference. Newsflash, dude, it's your job as the offensive coordinator to help the young man. I can point to 5 other fans, all of whom are on this call with me, who could have helped the young man. And yet the offensive coordinator paid 7 digits a year to help the guy couldn't. I don't want him to be the OC. In fact, the only way I would hire the guy is if Eric told me he was going to hire an offensive coordinator and turn the offense over to him. If Eric's planning on being Andy Reid in Washington, I don't want him to be the head coach either. Don't want him calling plays. Well, I mean, that's just me, right? I look, like everybody else on this right here, right now, I think it really doesn't matter who they hire. Day 2, I'm going to fall in line and cheer for the guy because this is my team. And it's been my team for 45 years plus. And I don't know any different. I don't know how to do anything differently. But there are other candidates out there that excite me more than Eric Bieniemy. I still feel, I think Chris is right. I think there's a mystery candidate we don't know. I don't think the 3 that everybody's pointing at are going to get the job. Of the 3 that everybody's pointing at, I think Quinn is probably the best option for this team for a number of reasons that have been mentioned tonight. as much as I'm not sure whether he excites me. The defense will get better. I guarantee you that. He'll figure out how to rush the passer.
It would immediately turn to who's running the offense, right? That if somebody comes in who's got a reputation as one of these young up and comers, whose name we may not even know, right? For who was it that the Green Bay Packers today hired the Boston College head coach to
As their
replace Joe
defensive
Barry
coordinator.
as their defensive coordinator, who may turn out to be the next Wink Martindale for all we know, or he may be gone in a year. What I'm saying is whoever ends up being the head coach, if it's particularly a defensive guy, almost as big as the head coaching hire in terms of getting things started here is going to be the offensive coordinator. And it may well be a name we have never heard of.
Well, and to that end, Mark, I mean, there are a couple of fascinating names out there for, who've been head coaches, but who probably aren't getting interviewed to be head coaches, or haven't been head coaches, but aren't being talked about for coordinator positions at the moment, who are just flat out of work. Wink Martindale's one of them. I mean, I don't know who comes in to coach this team, but Wink Martindale's floating around out there, and he has not been picked up by anybody to be their defensive coordinator. Name on the other side of the ball that wouldn't totally disappoint me, Frank Reich as offensive coordinator.
Isn't Greg Roman out there too?
I think Greg Roman is out there. He excites me less than Frank does. Roman does some innovative things. He did some great things under Harbaugh in San Francisco, but I feel like for the direction the NFL is going, Roman's a little more conservative. He would be great with a young quarterback like Howell, or if we draft somebody with number 2. I mean, that's probably pretty solid. But I think Reich could figure that out and strike a balance as well.
I just wanted to throw out there in terms of mystery candidates. We talked about Wilkes, but on the Chiefs side, we've got Matt Nagy, who's got head coaching experience, and also Steve Spagnuolo. I don't think Spagnuolo would be a candidate just because when he was with the Rams, they had two of the 3 seasons were god awful seasons, like 1 and 3 win seasons. And then, but Matt Nagy, he's only 45. He was the Bears head coach for 4 seasons, and he had a 12-4 record, an 8-8 record twice. And then he got fired the last year with a 6-11 record. But the only reason I bring him up is I think he's pretty well regarded. And his quarterbacks during that stretch were Mitch Trubisky, Nick Foles, a rapidly declining Nick Foles, and Justin Fields as a rookie. So it's not exactly like he had the cabinet stocked with incredible quarterbacking during his time there. So I just want to throw that name out there because I think it is possible that he's on a list if they're waiting for the Super Bowl guys to possibly interview.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that they were planning to wait all along until someone on KC or San Francisco's staff was done. I mean, it's possible. And that would explain this apparent weird vacuum that we're in right now, right? That we thought we were hiring a guy on Monday, and here we are on Wednesday night, and what the hell, we haven't hired anybody yet. So yeah, if it's somebody there, and if there's another mystery candidate out there that really comes out of nowhere, that's going to answer a lot of questions. But if that's true, they're the least leaks in any organization in the history of organizations. Can I ask you guys why nobody is talking to Mike Vrabel? What am I missing here?
Well, the Titans GM, who is a really good friend with Adam Peters, he says he had nothing to do with letting Vrabel go. Like, I guess that means he stepped out and let the owner fire him. I don't know. But I think there's some bad blood there. That's just what I've read. And I apologize.
From what I've understood, Vrabel wants a lot more control over players and personnel decisions. And I don't know that Adam Peters, being a first-time GM, is going to even want to introduce that into the conversation.
It's funny because I've been kind of looking. I haven't been scouring the internet for it, but I keep waiting to hear something more definitive like that. Because it makes little sense to me that he didn't get any serious sniff anywhere. He really couldn't.
He's got a reputation for being a stubborn SOB. I'm not saying that's a bad thing because I'm a SOB, but I do think he has that reputation. And I don't know that Josh Harris, I don't know that that's the kind of guy he's looking for. Like a Bill Belichick type, my way or the highway type. I mean, good God, we've got the 10-man interview committee. We can't even let Adam Peters go out there and pick his own head coach. So I can't imagine they would gravitate towards somebody that's like super alpha male. I don't know.
I don't know. On the other hand, they said several times over and over leadership, right? I keep hanging my hat on that whoever it ends up being, we better be able to hold that up and say, okay, well, this is what they meant, right? This is a guy who exudes that leadership thing. And it may be less about X's and O's with that guy than it is with someone who can walk in the room and everyone's going to listen to him. And then he's going to send him to the offensive and defensive meeting rooms with the coordinators. And he's going to go about the business of being a head coach, like the CEO coach. That's sort of all it looks like we're trying to do now. This is going to be an interesting week. If we're waiting till after the Super Bowl, imagine what the internet and Commanders fans in collective psyche is going to look like.
Well,
I have a
hold on, time
procedural
out.
question.
Before you go further, but let me just respond. That's already been irrational. It's not going to get more rational, okay? I'm just going to put it out there. It's been irrational for 25 years. It's going to maintain. It's going to stay that way.
Absolutely.
Why haven't, I mean, I almost feel like since that we're in the interview period, they could be interviewing Steve Wilkes right now if they wanted to. Why haven't they announced a hire? It doesn't take that long to do a contract. I mean, I would almost say if we don't hear something by the end of the day tomorrow, that it's not going to be one of those three guys that we've interviewed so far. I almost.
I have a procedural question. I'm sure one of you guys know. Since the Rooney Rule requirements, say that 3 times fast, have been satisfied, could someone like a Steve Wilkes, who was not previously be interviewed, be hired on one interview?
I think so. I don't think there's any requirement for.
Yeah, I don't think there's
interviews.
any inventory. Or sorry,
There didn't have to be like prior. You had to have one virtual, and then you had to have an in person, or is it just that you had to have an in person?
I think you could do it if you just wanted to hire the guy. I don't know that there's a requirement.
Yeah, I don't think you could hire prior to now without, when that virtual period was open, where the only thing you could do was virtual interviews. I think the requirement was.
You mean if they could hire Wilkes like right this minute? No, I don't think they can hire
just
Wilkes.
just on one interview.
Yeah, but I don't think you can officially hire him until the team's season is concluded.
Okay.
So you could interview him today, but I don't think you could hire him until the day after the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Okay. I just didn't know there was a multiple interview requirement.
I believe that's what happened with Gannon in Atlanta, right? Out of Philly.
Yeah.
Which is why it seemed like a long time when they hired their GM, and then it was over a month before they hired their coach. But that's because they got a guy who was in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Bob, we can't hear you, buddy.
He's
Sorry,
talking to himself. He wanted
the family came home from dance, and so I figured I'd turn the microphone off so that you didn't get everybody coming in. John, you've been the guy that's steadfastly keeping us up to date on the rules, and I really appreciate that. But I think I want to say on the board at one point in time, you posted something about if you hadn't previously interviewed a guy, you couldn't interview them in the 2 weeks between the championship game and the Super Bowl for the first time. Am I remembering that right? Or
I mean, I may have said that because the rules are pretty confusing, even if you're reading.
It's like sausage gravy.
What I saw earlier, like just prior to the pod tonight, was that window from the 29th of January to the 4th of February, they can interview Super Bowl coaches.
Okay.
But then after that, they're locked out until after the Super Bowl, the day after the Super Bowl. So
I mean,
think
I'm almost at the point now that since we haven't hired anybody by the end of the day today, I'm almost not expecting anything until after the Super Bowl.
I'm almost there too, Derek. I really am. And I was reading somewhere earlier today, or maybe it was yesterday. I think we kind of forget because in our lore, the guys become monumental, but nobody expected Joe Gibbs to get the head coaching gig in Washington. Nobody was talking about Joe Gibbs as a head coaching candidate anywhere when Bobby Beathard plucked him off the staff at San Diego and said, "You're the new coach of the Washington Redskins." And we may be staring at a very similar situation here.
Well, one thing I will say to that, not to be a wet blanket on that, in the current day and age, that doesn't generally happen because of the amount of exposure that there is now. And that's usually not only with coaches but with players. Usually because of the amount of the fact that the 24-hour news cycle is now the 24-minute news cycle. I hate to sound terrible. I'm not holding my breath that we're just going to find some unseen, coordinator that the diamond in the rough. I just don't know that that's the same NFL as it is as
Well,
it
it's
once
true.
was.
I'm not suggesting whoever we hire, Derek, is going to turn out to be the second coming of Gibbs. Please understand that. I'm just saying that we may very well shock the world with whoever it is we appoint,
Right.
because he's not on any media. Remember, the media is who anointed these guys as
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of people fell victim to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the new cycle. What we need to hope is that the brain trust that we're all, I think, still, I mean, by the way, I still pinch myself on a fairly regular basis when I'm remembering fucking Dan Snyder's on a yacht in the Mediterranean
And
he
he's not our
doesn't own this
owner
team
anymore. Yeah.
He has
And
nothing to do with this.
for the first time in 25 years, we have a legitimate general manager running football ops. I mean, I remind myself of that when I get a little frustrated that we're waiting to hear who our coach is going to be, and that the Senior Bowl thing is going on, and we don't have a guy there. Well, yeah, we're getting caught in a transition here a little bit. But looking at the big picture still, I don't know. I hope you guys aren't too down on this process. I mean, if McDonald goes on to become Bill Belichick and wins 8 Super Bowls over the next 15 years, yeah, we're all going to wish that we had been a bit more aggressive. But until something like that happens, and I got to tell you, I'm looking forward to hearing who it's going to be and watching them build a staff and watching them get ready for the draft and free agency and all that. It's going to be great to watch this process without that cloud hanging over everything.
I agree with everything you're saying. However, I'm gonna channel Henry, our friend Henry, who I wish he would come on with us, and so he could say it himself. But until they prove it, like you just said, that we have an unquestioned GM, a bona fide GM. No, we don't. We have a first-time GM. We have no idea whether he's going to be great or bad, and so I cannot get rid of my skepticism. I'm hoping, and I'm just saying we don't know.
Oh yeah, no, we don't. There's no guarantee this is going to work, fellas. There is no guarantee any of this.
But in the same conversation, we can't hold ghosts of Redskins past against this current regime either.
We didn't even try what we're trying with Adam Peters since Charlie Casserly walked out of the building.
We're in the prologue of a multi-chapter book here,
Absolutely.
right? Like we haven't even hit chapter 1 yet. That's in September. So we'll see how things start off. There's a long way to go. So the like one thing that I've literally seen people on Twitter calling Adam Peters trash and a disaster. And it's like, hold on, like let's really think about this. Did we think that we were going to go from Dan Snyder to perennial contender in not even one off season? The season hasn't even become the off season yet. In one postseason, like let's hold off a little bit.
I don't think those fans represent the fan base, though. No,
I know that. Well, they represent another board that we're not going to talk about. But the point being, even if this coaching hire doesn't work out, there's a long way to go in this marathon to get to where we want to be. And to expect it to all come together with new owner, new GM, new coach, new offense, new everything, a new roster, and all of that, and in one season be not only turned around, but be a legitimate contending team. I don't think that that's a fair idea of how the NFL works. You know what I mean? Like, so
You're absolutely right, Derek. And I want to throw out a second, almost a corollary to that. And that is that a guy can be a great head coach and not be a great fit for the organization that we've got here.
you mean like Belichick in Cleveland?
That was where I was fixing to go. Belichick in Cleveland couldn't get it done. Different organization, different mindset, different front office. In New England, people keep thinking, I keep reading about, Belichick is was this great personnel guy. He had some interesting characters in the front office in New England when he went to work there. I'm thinking about Scott, I want to say Pelosi, but that's not it. Pioli. That was it. Pioli played a huge part in assembling those early New England Patriot teams that were so successful with Belichick. And he wasn't successful in Cleveland with a completely different front office setup. So McDonald may end up being brilliant in Seattle, where he might not have been brilliant in Washington. Conversely, he might bomb in Seattle and then 5 years from now end up coaching in Washington and be brilliant with Adam Peters as his partner. And all of us lamenting the fact that we didn't get him 5 years sooner.
Even though that 5 years of experience could have been the difference.
Exactly, which is exactly where I was going with that. The key to this is finding the pieces that fit together correctly. If they don't fit together correctly, it doesn't mean they're bad pieces. It just means they're the wrong pieces for us. And it's entirely possible that Adam Peters had that first interview with Ben Johnson thinking Johnson's likely going to be the guy. And he came away from it going, I'm not sure he's the guy. Maybe he came out, which is why we drug our feet and wanted that face-to-face interview in Detroit that ultimately ended up giving him time. And I don't want to bag on Ben Johnson either. God does, the dude went through probably the worst 24 hours that an NFL coach can go through. I mean, he had how many receivers drop balls in San Francisco that would have solved problems that now his head coach and apparently good friend is taking a tremendous amount of fire over. Just one 4th down conversion, and we're having a very different conversation today. And who knows what happened to him Monday and Tuesday that made him change his mind. He may have been utterly convinced he wanted to be a head coach somewhere next year until Sunday blew up in his face. And so I haven't walked that mile in his moccasins, to use my dad's phrase. I don't know where he was and what he went through in the 48 hours from game to calling Adam Peters and saying, take my name off the table. But I do believe that Peters is looking for the guy that is the right piece. Whether he's the piece that the media likes, the piece that the fan likes, I hope Adam Peters doesn't give a shit.
Do you think I just want to throw this out there maybe as our final question of the night. Do you think our ownership group is too involved in this process? And I'll just ask it in the bluntest possible way that I can. What the hell does Josh Harris and Mitchell Rails and Magic Johnson et al., what do they know about what we need?
Well,
I know it's their team.
I'll rebut. Magic Johnson has not been a single part of this for the coach. Like, somebody even posted on Twitter, which is why it's irrational as shit. Magic Johnson doesn't even care. He was in New Orleans or something yesterday, posting pictures with his family. Like, he wasn't involved in the coaching search.
Wasn't there a report that the final in-person interview was going to include Rails and Harris and Peters? John, your larger question, I share the why would you exactly do that? I'm not sure that Jack Kent Cook was in the room with Beathard when he decided to hire Gibbs or not, but I do know that Beathard had to go to Gibbs or Beathard had to go to Cook to get the final approval. So I don't think that the process itself is flawed. I'd like to think that there weren't too many people involved and that led to delays that may have cost us a candidate. If it turns out that that's what happened, I'm not going to be real happy about that either.
Mark, to clarify that, I went back and read an article in the Post about the whole hiring of Gibbs. Beathard made the decision, told Cook the decision. Cook interviewed Gibbs and agreed with Beathard's decision. But Beathard handled the entire search up to the point that he had his candidate. And then Cook said, I want to talk to him.
Makes you wonder how they handle it out in Seattle, right? They were decisive, apparently, when they wanted their guy, they grabbed him. So, but it's a legit question, John, and that's one that we'll be parsing out, I think, as we go forward.
Well, and just to throw this out there, this organization has been so leak tight. I question the reports about who's involved.
Yeah.
You know, that's just me. Yeah. Now, maybe somebody in the organization has been told to communicate these names are involved in the process. That is entirely possible and totally plausible under the circumstances. But this organization's been so good about minding its business and not leaking things to the media that I question whether or not people are making shit up at this point in time.
And circle around to what Chris said at the top of this whole thing, that we all were so thrilled that we finally have a professional organization that doesn't have vocal diarrhea. And that's one of those careful what you wish for deals, right? Because God damn it, I want to know what's going on.
Right.
I'll just say, if we've gotten to this point with all of the people we've interviewed, with all of the people that we have multiply interviewed, and we're down to 3, and we like all of them, and they're all leaders, and sometime in the next 10 days out of left field, they hire Steve Wilkes from the 49ers. That is going to be the current generation's version of the movie The Sting.
Or the usual suspects, right?
The usual suspects, yeah. Like there, that would really be 3D chess.
Yeah. I love it. Well, so for anybody and everybody listening in, we're in the same boat you all are. We want to know what the hell's going on. We're in a hurry because we care. So check in with us. We'll be back here next week. Maybe we'll have someone to talk about.
God willing.
God willing. We're all day to day.
All right, gents, it's been a pleasure.
Night, guys.
Until next time.